Welcome to the Human Performance Outliers Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Shawn Baker and Zach Bitter. At Human Performance Outliers Podcast, we dive into a wide range of topics revolving around health, nutrition, and physical fitness. If you enjoy the show and wish to support us, please visit patreon.com/HPO podcast. If you do not use Patreon but still wish to support us, please also consider checking out our PayPal page at paypal.me/HPO pod. The link to both of those can also be found in the show notes. Finally, please consider subscribing to us on your favorite podcast listening platform. Now, on to the next topic.
Zach, you want to start? We're recording now. So Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, thank you. A lot of things have happened in your life since we came back. So you're a new mom to a beautiful little baby girl. And she's how old now? She's about, 4 months or something like that?
Yeah, that's right. 4 months tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, good for you. How's life treating you now with Parenthood?
So it's interesting. It's not necessarily what I expected. So it's from 0 to 1. Seems like it's a really big jump, you know? Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, I did the birth all natural, and it's the breastfeeding that's way worse than the actual birth.
I can't relate. I have no experience.
But it's interesting, and Shawn, you and I are friends and we've talked, and I was actually sick my entire pregnancy, talking 10 months of nausea and vomiting. Mm-hmm. And now I'm finally back to a better, more substantial diet.
Good for you. I mean, I'm glad I don't have to be pregnant. I'm glad there's women that do that for us. So
you actually set us up for the first really good question. What was the pregnancy diet like? Or how much could you tolerate to consume in general, I guess?
It's really interesting. My normal diet is largely red meat. I feel the best on that. And I typically ate about 2 pounds with some herbs and some fats before I got pregnant. When I got pregnant, I actually got so ill that the majority of my diet was carbohydrates. Otherwise, I'd vomit. And now I'm back to my normal diet of higher protein, and it's about as far as I've gotten.
Did it take a while to get used to that again, or was it a pretty smooth transition when you got past kind of the nausea and were able to go back to your normal routine?
It took a little bit. It was interesting. I was still a little nauseous for a period of time afterwards. And it's interesting because I've never had that experience before. I mean, obviously it's my first baby, but it's interesting how the body rejects a lot of foods. For me, I was only able to tolerate bland foods. And interestingly, I had an immune reaction to that. Having to increase my carbohydrates, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Malaysia, when was it? About a little over a month ago, and I was giving some talks, and there was another lecturer there from Cambridge University, a PhD. He's got a company where he does like food allergy or sensitivity testing, and he said they've done like 250,000 tests a year for 20 years. And the only food that almost never comes up as a sensitivity allergy is red meat, which is surprising because they'll see it with eggs, they'll see it with dairy, they'll see it with seafood and shellfish, and obviously plant foods, peanuts and citrus and all kinds of plant stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see. But so now, is she sleeping through the night yet? Are you at that? I know you're probably almost at that stage. I know.
Almost.
Mine were there where maybe one feeding in the night. You try to top them off really good before they go to bed. Give them the Big Mac before they go to bed. Hopefully they sleep through the night.
She's really physical. She started, where they go on their stomach and kind of push up. She started doing that at 6 weeks, staying upright.
Wow, and good for her. Super
active. Not quite sleeping through the night, just a very active baby.
That's good. I found it because I've had 4, and I remember it was like for the first 2 years, they're like, all I do is poop and eat a little bit, and they're kind of mom. And then once they start moving and getting around, and dad, it's more dad. I mean, you hold them and stuff like that, but it's just kind of like, I'm waiting for you to get where we can go out and do some stuff, run around, wrestle, do that stuff. So anyway, it's fun for mom early on. So
yeah. It's interesting. I just started back at work, so it's been my I'm in the clinic 2 days a week and it's my first time back. And it's interesting, after 4 months of being at home and then separating from her, it's an interesting experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's something like that maternal bond that's just, just kind of interesting because she's totally dependent on you to survive, and it's kind of interesting how we kind of make it as humans. We had your former, I guess, mentor Don Lehman on the show a while back. Talked about some good protein stuff, and I know that I don't think you, and I know you've been on some interesting. I know you were on the Doctors, and you were on Mark Hyman's show, and so you've been getting some pretty decent sort of media, and you're trying to fight the good fight for certainly certainly protein, and so are you finding that is a difficult fight to make in those arenas?
It's probably the most challenging, and I can't believe it. I mean, I cannot believe the level of propaganda and anti-animal narrative that is currently coloring what individuals are actually even hearing. And Don actually was here visiting the baby. Don Lehman, he's mentored me for years, 2 decades, but he's also one of my best friends. And he was here, and we just were discussing what's happening. So he's actually speaking to academic, institutions about this very thing. And the propaganda narrative is really bad. And it starts with probably the money behind it, but then the physicians. So physicians inherently want to do the right thing. So I, went on a show with other physicians, and that show will remain nameless, although you know what that show is. And they were very plant-based, and they had their biases, and the information, I could say, hey, the annals of internal medicine through the grade system looked at if protein was bad, if red meat consumption needs to change. And this is what they do. They are epidemiologists. This is what they do. They look at data. The grade system is the same system that they used for trans fats. And they found that we don't need to reduce red meat.
Yeah, interestingly, and I don't know if you're aware, you may know that Professor Gordon Guyat is the chair of that Nutrirex consortium. He's actually coming on the show tomorrow, so we've got him coming on. But he, and Zach may not even know this, but he is in the Canadian Hall of Fame, Medical Hall of Fame. The term evidence-based medicine, evidence-based medicine we think is also wonderful and great. He actually invented that term. He was the guy that coined that term in a paper in 1991. And so he's the guy that's been doing this for 30 some years, evidence. And he's the guy that's saying, hey, there's no evidence that red meat is bad for us. And so, I mean, it's like, who better qualified do you have than the guy that invented evidence-based medicine to say, this is evidence. And we've got this, and it's sad to see that we want to be, there's like this science, and like, I believe this science, but that's it. We've got guys like Dr. Michael Greger saying, we don't need to do any more studies. We already know it all.
It's outrageous, And then so one of my patients came in today and said that her endocrinologist recommended the book, The Longevity Diet. Now, I don't need to tell you what kind of data is in the longevity diet, but books are not, books are not peer-reviewed information. And it's just so interesting how this trickles down from, you have to depend on the integrity of the researcher.
Yeah, no, it's very much true. And then even the research itself can be problematic. I think it's just, and I wrote a book and it wasn't peer reviewed. But basically I go in there and say, we've got a lot of things we don't know, and there's a lot of problems with our nutrition science, the way it's gathered, the way we interpret it, the way it's just not strong data. And I think, back to the grade system, when we look at Gordon Guyot, the World Health Organization accepts the grade system. So does the Cochrane Collaborative. So does 100 other organizations. And so it's like, why are we not considering that relevant now? Well, because it doesn't match the narrative we want to hear. And it's kind of a feel-good thing. But really, I think, my thought is we've got, and I think I can't remember who pointed this out. I think maybe Belinda Fettke or Zoe Harcum or somebody, they pointed out that there's about $5.7 trillion of capital out there trying to create this plant-based meat alternate protein industry, which is going to be projected 100 billion or plus. And so there's a lot of narrative. There's a lot of, sort of pressure to do this, and you just watch it happen. You can just see it happen, and it's starting. I don't know what, obviously your little girl is going to grow up and go to school, and when she's going to get to school and she's going to hear all this, this sort of propaganda that, stop being mean and eating meat and save the planet and all that stuff.
And it's interesting because the good fight, I would say initially I believed fighting the good fight and doing it right was educating people and saying, hey, listen, you need high quality protein. You especially need it as you age. It's important, not just for muscle mass, but overall well-being, right? Muscle is your metabolic currency. You have to protect against sarcopenia. And I really believed in my heart that we had to just educate, and educating people was enough. And that everyone was going to say, oh, wow, this makes so much sense. And then there came a point where I realized that the conversation it's not about education anymore. It is not about education. It is, how do we make sense and get through the narrative that is, and the propaganda that is pushing people to bad belief systems. I mean, it's so far beyond saying, here, let me present the data to you, because, you and I would say, okay, I'm looking at this. I can see where I'm right. I can see where I'm wrong. This makes sense. That's not even the conversation anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, people get their data from celebrities, from sound bites, from social media. This is the arena we live in now. This is where most of the data is out there. And so I recognize that this was basically a war of propaganda at this point. So you got to get out there and just, be on it 24/7, and you got to fight fire with fire, unfortunately. And I get criticized for doing that, but that's what actually works. That's what actually gets people to listen. And then you can present the data. But I mean, people don't want to hear the data. They've already made up their mind. Yeah. Oh, a pig is cute, and I can eat a Beyond Meat pig, or whatever they're going to do, or Beyond Pig or something like that. And so it's just.
Do they really have a Beyond Pig?
I don't know if they do. They probably have some. I think they have a pork analog. I mean, they've got beef and they've got chicken and fish.
They've got a Beyond Fish, I think, don't they?
Yeah, they've got like a fake fish sort of thing, and so it's kind of it's.
And that's just weird. If you don't believe in eating it, don't pretend like you're gonna eat it. It's just weird.
Yeah, that's got to be marketing to pull people who aren't along the ethical lines, I would imagine, right? Like like a lot of people they're ritualistic and habitual with what they eat. So they're like, I'm going to have my burger and I'm going to have this or that. And when they try to slide in, say, the plant-based burger, then they think it's going to slide in more seamlessly than, say, like a bean burrito or a bean burger or whatever they used to use for that stuff.
Well, I mean, we have to realize that the marketing and the people that are consuming these fake meat burgers are not vegans. I mean, they're only 1 to 2% of the market anyway. Right. 95% of the people that buy that stuff are omnivores that think they're going to save their health or their planet by eating the processed crap, which is completely not true. And there's such ridiculous marketing that goes behind that. But
yeah.
What? So I mean, yeah. Let me ask you, Gabrielle, what's the latest? I mean, you're back into practice.
Yeah.
I know you were doing some experimentation with peptides and stuff like that. Is the practice still pretty similar? I know Shane is in medical school now. I don't know if you changed the way you have to practice and with the baby. Are you changing much the way your practice is?
So yeah, this is funny, Zach. I don't know if you know, but my husband was in the SEAL teams for a decade.
Oh, cool.
I think that he just got too comfortable and decided he wanted to do something else. And he transitioned out of the SEAL teams. We had a baby. So he transitioned out in July, had a baby in August, and started medical school a week after.
Wow. Yes, you didn't waste any time.
It's like, well, why should things be easy and rainbows? So my practice is very similar. The practice of medicine is always evolving. I'm seeing patients 2 days a week. And then one telemedicine day. So the patients that are already my established patients. And I'm using peptides in practice and I do a lot of hormone replacement and really optimization. So that aspect of practice hasn't changed,
Yeah, that's actually this is a bit of a side note to what we were talking about, but the telemedicine stuff I think is really interesting. I hadn't really been too familiar with it until I think my most recent insurance thing had it included. And I was like, oh, that's a good way to streamline things a little bit. Have you found that that's been pretty useful, or is it kind of a little more difficult to be not in person with someone when you're talking about stuff like that?
I think if you know them really well, and I use telemedicine with the patients I know really well, that are in my personal practice. It's always nice to see them in person, but the way that everything is going, there is a level of convenience for the patient. I have patients from all over the country, and even in New York City, they're all over, and maybe they're busy executives and they don't have time to commute and then see me and then commute back. I really love my patients, so I prefer in person.
Yeah, I remember when I was back in residency many years ago, we had some of the early telemedicine stuff, and we were doing, as a resident, I was in Texas, and so we actually did 3 months out of every year as residents, we would work for the Texas Department of Corrections, and so we would provide healthcare to the inmates because it was a kind of a good win-win situation because we're still learning and they're prisoners. So, but I remember we were trying to do orthopedic exams from remotely on television, having some nurse trying to tell them to do this. It was just comical. And, I was just like, okay, there's things like you make someone duck walk where you walk like a duck, and, that'll kind of show you might have a meniscal injury. And you're trying to do these things, and I would goof around and say, okay, now flap your arms like a chicken. And I just kind of playing, sometimes playing with the guys, but it was just and so we would get all these, we think we have surgical patients. And so because it's such a high risk to bring them in because they're inmates, it require big security details, and we would get death row guys, and we get all kinds of people they're bad people that we end up operating on. But we bring them in and we try to make the diagnosis over telemedicine, and probably 50% of the time we were wrong. We were like, well, we think you have this injury, and we actually put our hands on them. It's like, we're wrong. You don't need surgery. Send you back. But that was just the system at the time. But I think for certain practices, it's very conducive. The other ones, it's not, and so it's kind of still evolving with the way it works. But I don't think it's turning around. I mean, I think we're going to continue to mobilize, and there's more and more physicians online, and more like what I'm doing now with this company we just started called MeetRx.com, which is basically lifestyle and health coaching. That's all mobile, and eventually it'll all be on cell phones, and that's where we're going to go with that. But that's
the way of the future. I mean, having the capacity where it's not just one. I mean, people will always crave one-on-one connection. I believe that to be true. But I think that there is a component of that with the availability of telemedicine is really, really helpful, because you can reach people that wouldn't normally be able to see you,
Yeah, I mean, that is a great equalizer. And I would say that as much of my communication now is, via text, tweets, whatever, direct messages through. When I do get a live video, it's like a huge step up. It's like, wow, I get to talk and see your face, and have more than a typing sentences. And so it's still not as good as in person, but it is a huge improvement. And we do know that people that have support for whatever the outcome, whether it's just a friendly voice or somebody guiding them, their outcomes are always better than if they just go and try to do it on their own. So we know that's occurring for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just bring something up to you, actually to the listener, because it really got under my skin. And I actually sent you this message yesterday. Medscape sent, what is the study that I sent you? It was really disturbing to me.
Yeah, it was two epidemiologic studies looking at protein. I think they were basically protein associations and
it was a big
disease.
It said high protein diet could be harmful even for healthy kidneys. Right? I sent this to you, and I sent it to Don Layman. This is so frustrating because it's Medscape, and Medscape is considered a pretty honorable place for information for physicians, and they're sending this out, right? And this is, I don't even know, who is the group behind that is sending that out. This epidemiological studies from obscure journals. How did that make it into the headlines?
What are they defining as high? Like when do you enter high protein versus moderate protein?
I think you're like 20% of your calories coming from protein, and
that's high.
That's considered high. The average American's getting like 12 to 15%, which I would argue is dreadfully low. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing this, and it's almost as if even our journals or our go-to resources are resorting to clickbait, silliness. It's the same thing because they're just wanting to drive traffic, and it doesn't even matter if it's helpful to patients or not. And it is not a, the thing that frustrates me is we just keep doing these epidemiologic studies, which never, ever, ever lead to anything. Just do some damn studies, do some actual research on human beings, and stop, doing this epidemiologic stuff, which is a waste of time.
And I completely agree with you. And I bring that up because this is what the physicians are seeing. And so the physicians are believing this, and then they're telling it to patients. It just feels as if this is an uphill battle that, we cannot educate. It's really challenging. Anyway, that's my rant.
It is challenging, and I do it every day. But I think it's worth fighting. I think we just can't lay down and do that because, like I said, you've got little kids. You've got a daughter. I've got little kids, and maybe one day Zach will have some little marathon runners in his house. But if we don't do anything now, it's going to be. There's a book out there. The gal that wrote the Handmaid's Tale. And she wrote a couple other books with that, and one of them, I can't remember the name of it, but one of them describes this sort of fake meat, lab-grown meat future, and it's dystopian. I just think about that all the time. They actually called it SMEAT, SMEAT, like synthetic meat, SMEAT, yeah. And this is what we were eating, and that was just the way it is. And I think there's some people that can't wait for that. They just crave this, Star Trek. We're going to just get our food prepared in the holodeck, or and it's going to pop in some little food that looks like what it's supposed to be, but it's really just chemicalized garbage that it's just frustrating that people are willing to do that. They're happy about that. It's just in the name of convenience, in the name of I don't want to make eating a priority or nutrition a priority. I just want to sit there and stare at a screen and put kibble in my mouth.
Well, what was that product that came out a few years ago that was like tied to, it was tied to just a lot of like the coding community, I think, because they didn't want to like break away from works, but they'd find these situations where these guys weren't like eating all day long because they were just coding.
It might have been something called, it might have been that Huel stuff. It was like human fuel, Huel.
Soylent. Was it Soylent?
That was
Soylent
it.
Or Soylent, yeah, something like that. It's supposed to be all nutritionally complete, everything you need as a human or something like that. It's just awful.
The propaganda is dangerous to the mass public, but who it really ends up affecting is the aging population. I mean, really. So they are going to, when you're younger, there's a lot of flexibility. You can eat a nonsensical diet and actually do okay. But, in the aging population, it's much less forgiving. And it's so dangerous for them in particular. To eat less protein, to eat lower quality protein, that is the single worst piece of advice that you could ever give someone to age well. Literally, the single worst piece of advice.
Are they even advocating for the elderly population to keep their protein restricted, or is that still just an angle to be a little higher than the average?
Well, it should be, but right now the position papers have come out saying that it should be roughly double the RDA, and there's the ProDage study that's a great study, but the guidelines are still 0.8 grams per kilogram per body weight. Per pound body weight, right? 0.8 grams per kilogram. That's still the recommendation.
Yeah, I mean that's basically prevent sarcopenia or maybe prevent sarcopenia and die. But I mean it's just kind of well, I mean we've had, Don Lehman, Stu Phillips, Jose Antonio, Keith Barr, yourself. I mean, we've got so many people on there that are on the pro protein side of this thing, and I think. In fact, I just reposted one of our clip with Keith Barr on my little YouTube channel talking about mTOR, because there's this, this group out there that thinks that mTOR, like Walter Longo and others, that mTOR is the enemy and we should keep it super low. And to do that, we've got to cut our protein. And we found out it's much more nuanced than that. And that if we can still eat protein, and particularly if we resistance train, it'll shuttle all that mTOR activity into our muscle where we want it. We want to preserve that lean muscle mass, and we can still prevent, disease, aging, cancer, with doing that. So you can still eat plenty of protein. So it's kind of, we don't get the whole story on some of this stuff.
Well, and mTOR is different in muscle than liver. And I was talking to Donald Lehman about this. It's in different tissues and it responds to different stimulus. In muscle, it's leucine, and the pancreas, or the liver, it's insulin, right? It's not the same all around. I mean, the mechanism is the same, but the stimulus is different.
Isn't it too, like, I think like when you find someone who's following a high protein diet, however you want to define that, they tend to be folks who are more like animal product based, and they're not probably eating like 4 or 5 meals a day. They're probably eating a couple. So like, isn't that another kind of side of the mTOR story too, where like if you are having those larger spacings between those feeding sessions, then it's less of an issue because you're not just kind of pinging it all the time?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thought process, that the machinery essentially resets every 4 to 5 hours. You don't want to keep it on per se, right? For lack of a better term, and to continuously stimulate it through, all day long. It shouldn't be on. It should be in discrete meals, not a grazing effect. And of course, insulin is a much bigger trigger for mTOR.
Yeah, we saw the insulin calories, and like I said, I eat twice a day, and so I'm only spiking it twice a day, and it's usually in association with exercise, and so it's I'm not particularly concerned about that, and hopefully we'll move on to common sense. I mean, like we had Ted Naiman on here talking about, we already know what happens to protein restricted people, and it's the nursing home population. You see them, and I had patients I'd operate on, and if you just grab their skin would fall off. I mean, their skin was just, you touch them, and you see these people with such fragile skin. I mean, they're just literally falling apart.
Yeah. And that's who the narrative really affects, is this population. But we're just gonna have to protect them.
Well, and I think like, if you want robust, healthy kids, get them on. Hopefully, you got baby planning on getting her on some good, high quality, animal fat and meat on her for her brain and stuff like that. But the thing is, they target, because most of this targeting, this stuff is designed, particularly the environmental stuff, the emotional stuff is targeting younger generations, and particularly women. I mean, women seem to be the ones that tend to fall for this emotional veganism argument. There's a disproportionate number of women, vegans that are women, and then they tend to be, 16-year-old, 14-year-old girls to maybe in their early 20s, and then they get, their health doesn't go well. I mean, I guess I think you've commented you've had some patients that were that, and they don't generally do particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely my sickest patient population. I think that there's a lot of other things that go along with it. It creates a very unhealthy relationship with food, at least from what I've seen in my experience, in my clinical experience. From what I've seen, they it creates a very disordered, I'll just say this, it creates a very disordered relationship with food. And that's not to say that people that aren't vegan don't have a disordered relationship with food. That's totally possible too, but the focus can create a lot of issues in that way.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are, we see a lot of anorexic gals that adopt veganism, and then they just kind of hide their anorexia with a different name, and we see that. But
all right, folks, this episode of Human Performance Outliers Podcast is brought to you by ButcherBox. ButcherBox is a meat delivery company that brings you high-quality beef, chicken, pork, salmon, and scallops. What does this mean? All products are natural and humanely raised or sustainably wild caught, as is the case with their salmon and scallops. If you are concerned with how the animals you eat were raised, rest assured, ButcherBox partners with farmers who are inspired by Dr. Temple Grandin, a member of the Humane Farm Animal Care Program's Scientific Committee. Their beef is 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. The chicken is organic and the pork is heritage breed with no added sugar. So, Head over to butcherbox.com and place an order today. And don't forget to enter promo code HPO for a discount. Thank you for supporting one of our long-standing sponsors. Now, back to the show.
What is, I know your population, is it still like athletes and executives mostly? Is that kind of still who most of your population is?
It is. And of course, I do work with military, special operations, combat operators. And that's a very interesting collection of individuals. And their needs are very different. So combat operators, executives, athletes, and I do a ton of weight loss as well.
What so I'd be interested about the diets of those particular populations of weight loss folks, and then in the special force, because I work with a lot of the pararescue guys, combat controllers in the Air Force, which basically is our special operators there, and they definitely had some different challenges in what they were doing activity wise that they had to support. But I didn't really know much about nutrition back then. I was just the orthopedic guy taking care of their their labral tears and whatever aches and pains, and handing out ibuprofen and doing all the stuff we used to do. That's probably not the best strategy anymore. But so what do you find the guys that are charging hard, the guys that are special forces or athletes are needing that's a little bit different from the general population? Then what are you doing for obesity?
So it's interesting. It depends on where they are in their cycle of deployment. If they're home, obviously on deployment, depending on where they're going, they either have cooks or they don't have access to really fresh food, and they're doing a lot of MREs. And you were in the military, you don't really get the highest quality of food, and the calorie consumption that these guys need is tremendous. One of the things that we have been talking about doing, and it's really based on the individual, is doing more paleo style MREs. And they have them. They're much more expensive, and the guys can purchase them themselves, and depending on where the funding is, get them themselves. That has been very helpful for them. I mean, again, the best impact that you can have nutritionally with the special operations is actually when they get home. So they go through a repair cycle, because when they're out in the field, it's a totally different ballgame. And in terms of weight loss, for me, and also studying under Donald Layman, it's really, you kind of phase them. They go through phases. But the first fundamental thing that we do, at least that I do in my clinic, is really fixing their nutrition. And that is sometimes even putting them on a protein sparing fast, which is a higher protein diet, and, depending on their level of obesity. But high protein is typically the staple.
Do you notice, because I know especially within kind of the carnivore community, there's I guess a debate maybe about whether, like, what these ratios of protein to fat should be. Have you been seeing any nuance within that? Or are you having people have more success on weight loss when they're leveraging protein versus keeping the protein still at a relatively high compared to the average American probably, but not high compared to what you might see in like a meat-based diet that isn't focused heavily on adding extra fat to it?
That's a really good question. I don't know. What is the average protein of a meat-based diet of a carnivore diet? What would that average be?
I use myself as the average guy, I guess. I'm not quite average, but most people are probably getting their protein intake is around anywhere between 25 and 40%. I'd say that would be the protein amount. So much higher than the average American diet.
So would it be, how would that break out? Like break down to be 1 gram per pound body weight, higher, 2 grams?
Yeah, I mean, that's something like, for me, I eat, what do I eat? So today I had 4 pounds of steak, and I'm 240 pounds right now. So that's probably
let's see,
350, maybe 400 grams of protein with that, depending on what. I weigh about 240.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm getting probably close to 1.5 grams per pound. So I'm eating definitely a high volume of protein, but that is, for someone that is trying to actively be strong and maintain muscle mass and training hard. I'm getting ready for these rowing world championships, and I have to ramp up my strength training and ramp up my conditioning. And so it's And there'll be days where I'll eat 6 pounds. I mean, I know that'll happen. Like I had 4 today, and it's still early. I might throw down another 2 more steaks and have 6 steaks today. So we'll just have to see how the appetite goes. Because I'm going to deadlift tomorrow, and I like to, and that'll probably stimulate my appetite again. So it's just, I'm fairly intuitive. I mean, obviously my diet is not very varied, and so it's kind of like when I'm hungry, I eat more, and when I train harder, I get hungry. I mean, it just makes sense that works, and that's how I do it. So,
and then how much fat is like an average? 50% would be then fat on average?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, so it's either protein and fat and mineral to no carbohydrate. And so it's, so I mean, something like 60% of my calories are coming from fat, typically maybe a little bit more depending on the day of the week or something like that. But it's about, I want to say about a one gram of protein per 1 gram of fat, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe even a little higher on the protein. Depending if I'm eating ribeyes, I'm eating more fat. That's probably as fatty as I get. And then a lot of times I'll eat, T-bones or fillets or hamburger or something like that. It's not. Sometimes I'll do a little fish, seafood. But it's kind of interesting right now, and it's just the way it works for me. When I'm eating nothing but steaks and water, I feel my best. I mean, my body composition feels my best. I feel stronger. I feel less inflamed. I just perform better. And so that's what I do. And then, the rest of the year, it might be, I'll put eggs in there and dairy in there and seafood in there. And once in a while, I'll have something that's not even carnivore at all. And, like my kid's birthday, I had a piece of cake on his birthday. And, it's just, but when I'm being honest with myself, that's what works for me. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
What was it that the Paleo Medicina group, didn't they have like an 82-18? Didn't they go as high fat as that?
I mean, I talked with the Chofia Clemens, that's sort of one of the lead researchers there, and they recommended 2 to 1, 2 grams of fat per 1 gram of protein, and you calculate that's about 81% fat. If you look at nine times whatever 2 and 1 times 4, it's 81% fat. But I challenged her on that, and I said, well, why is it exactly 2 to 1? Why is it exactly 81%? She says, well, it's not really. We're trying to shoot for a level of ketosis, and so if you're making the right amount of ketones with more protein, that's still fine. And that's one of the things I found. I don't know if you get too much into ketosis and ketones and measuring that stuff, but I've seen a lot of people that eat, despite eating quite a bit of protein, and there's actually studies that seem to support this, that they still make a fair amount of ketones, and it kind of really depends on the situation and the person. And as we know, and Zach knows, it's not just how much you make, it's how much you use. You can efficiently utilize how much you waste. It has to do with meal frequency, exercise intensity, caloric intake. There's a whole bunch of factors that go in there just besides macronutrient content. So I don't get too.
Definitely, all my, for my patients, when their calories are controlled, that's, important when whatever we determine is their caloric intake. I tend to go higher protein and lower fat, keeping fat in check. At least for women, I see a ton of women. And this is what I've found to be best for women. I think that when women try to go more ketogenic, I haven't seen it be successful. They may have a month honeymoon period, but then when I test their blood, their hormones are out of whack. Their thyroid isn't great. Their reverse T3 is elevated. They're not feeling well. They're not sleeping well. So, being trained by Donald Layman, I'm much more focused on protein rather than fat.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, particularly as an athlete, I tend to skew towards protein. And I know, like, when people are trying to get lean, like really lean, you gotta kind of skew more to protein and go away from fat. I mean, that just works. I mean, that works for pretty much every single person whose job depends on being lean. Fitness competitors, bodybuilders, and so on and so forth. And so that's what just works. Now, I would argue that there's a difference between ultra lean and ripped and being healthy. I mean, I don't know that losing your menstrual cycle and your libido and starving and being grumpy is necessarily the best place to be. But if you want to get there, then getting protein in there helps. I mean, it's also interesting to note that when we look at gastric bypass patient, what kind of diet do they put on pre-surgery to shrink their liver fat? Right. It's basically protein sparing modified fast. It's basically high protein.
So, and this is something that's actually been on my mind, and I'm glad that we're talking about it, the whole fiber thing. And I know that you've talked about it before. I don't know if you've read anything more recent, but, I just love to hear your thoughts on, should we cycle it? Is there, fiber restriction? Do you think we need it?
I don't think it's essential. I mean, it's clearly not, or if it was essential for life, I'd be dead long ago. I think, and this will be interesting to talk to Gordon Guyatt tomorrow, because I think, the same level of evidence out there that suggests that fiber is beneficial it wouldn't pass the grade classification. I'd say if you put that up against a grade classification, you would see that there's no real benefit. I'm going to ask him about that tomorrow if I get a chance.
Really interesting.
But, as far as fiber goes, I mean, yes, I think it's context dependent. If you are in a diet where you're having a hard time controlling your appetite, your satiety, if you're eating a lot of sugar and processed food, then fiber is going to displace some of that. It does have a role in satiety. And I think and that's one of the reasons it's beneficial, because it probably allows you to eat less. You could do it the same thing with cardboard or rocks. I mean, if you put a bunch of cardboard or rocks down your gullet, you would fill up and wouldn't be able to eat as much. I mean, I think that is the actual benefit of fiber. I don't think there's any. I'm not so excited about the microbiome and the short chain fatty acids. You can make that regardless. You can do it with amino acids. You can do it with converting beta hydroxybutyrate to butyrate is a very simple reversible reaction. So I don't get too excited about the people who say you got to have it for your microbiome, because I've had the opportunity to see a lot of people's microbiomes that do this fiber-free meat-based diet, and it's got great diversity. It's generally a healthy looking, what we consider healthy, although I would still say that we don't really know 100% what's healthy. We're way premature on making prescriptive proclamations about what we should be doing for our microbiome. So I would say, it's conditionally beneficial. It is not essential for life or even health, in my view. I think it's based on, again, epidemiology. It's based on some theories like I'm trying to think of the fellow, I keep blanking the guy's name, Dennis Burkitt, of Burkitt's lymphomas fame. When he was back in the 1940s studying Africans, saying, oh, look, they eat a lot of fiber and they're healthy. Therefore, fiber is healthy, and it's the same old correlation does not equal causation stuff. And then you got John Yudkin saying, yeah, but they don't eat a lot of sugar either. So, this is the low fat, high fiber narrative was more attractive to people that make cereal perhaps and sell sugar and, influenced. I mean, it's a rabbit hole. But, I think that for some people, and I have people on a carnivore diet, well, I tell them, hey, you need to add fiber back in for a little while if they're having digestive issues. But in the long run,
what kind of fiber? Is it a fiber supplement?
I just tell them I usually tell them to do it from food, just because I think it's something that it's just, I prefer people getting food and a lot of supplements, but I don't do it very often. And I often leave it up to them. It's to do as a temporary thing while they're doing it. But the problem is we don't have a lot of data on this population that I'm in, this cohort. Fortunately, that's coming. I know David Ludwig out of Harvard is going to be doing a study looking at our population here this year, and we'll get some more data, and hopefully that'll drive some interventional trials.
That's going to be amazing.
Because just to follow up with the butyrate, isn't butter got the highest amount of butyrate out of anything?
I don't know if it's the highest, Zach, but I know there's butyrate is a significant fatty acid found in butter, butyric acid. And so, yes, you can get it through butter, but more importantly, you can get it a lot of ways other than fermenting fiber, which we don't have a great capacity compared to other primates. And it's certainly like ruminant animals and things like that, who's, they munch on grass all day and they spend 16 hours grazing, or primates living in the trees that spend 60 or 70% of their time chewing. We just don't do that as humans.
Thank God.
Got time for other stuff then.
Yes.
So when are you going to, you're at 4 months. So are you solid food time? Are you about to introduce? Or are you going to wait till 6 months, or what's?
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Probably just, breastfeed for 6 months, figure it out. Another 2 months. I mean, what about you guys?
Well, Zach has very little experience with breastfeeding, and I only have secondhand experience. But I think my kids were a year on the breast, and I can't remember. I think we started introducing food around six months or so, and early on, my kids were on the rice cereal and all the stuff that I probably wouldn't do now.
Yeah, we won't be
Yeah.
doing that. We won't be doing that. We're gonna see how that goes.
What was it that Dr. Bill Schindler was telling us that all the indigenous tribes, they go from the breastfeeding and then it's the parent chews the food for the kid and passes before the whole food stuff goes. So you could go that route if you really want to get creative, but I want to bypass that step if you can.
Yeah, that's a pre-mastication, and it's interesting. I think with indigenous tribes, they tend to breastfeed for about, I think, 2.5 years. I mean, it's interesting.
Oh my gosh!
So that's what you got. So if you really got
a whole full-time job. I mean, really.
But here's an FYI: the longest period of weaning for a primate is the orangutan, who spends 8 years breastfeeding.
Oh.
Listen, I had no idea what my mother went through until I had a child. I should have been a lot nicer to her when I was 16. But it's interesting to see the mother's nutrition. It changes the composition of the breast milk. I mean, the quality of let me rephrase that. The breast milk main components like the alpha-lactalbumin, all that stuff is standard, right? But the other nutrients like zeaxanthin and iodine, all of that stuff actually gets into the breast milk, and it's dependent on what the mom eats. So the higher nutrient density of the mom, the better nutrient density of the breast milk.
Yeah, there are a number of studies looking at, for instance, vegetarian breast milk and seeing it's lower in critical fatty acids. That they say the outcomes, they don't know if it shows a big outcome difference, but and those things are critical for brain development. So obviously the first 2 years are really important for a baby's brain, and then everything in utero, of course. But I mean, that's a huge time for brain development for those babies. So it's good to get them high quality nutrition. That's the time. And that's the thing that saddens me is, they've got this position paper from the American Dietetics and Nutrition Association, which all the vegans sort of represent, and the punchline is it's the vegan diet is appropriate for all ages and stages. But when you look at the authors, when we talk about, is there a financial bias or even an intellectual bias? This is the thing that the grade thing talked about. They talk about intellectual bias. All three of the authors are ethical vegans that have vegan and vegetarian cookbooks. One of the guys, a Loma Linda guy. So all three of the authors that published this study are ethical vegans. And so you're like, well, maybe that's bias. And then you look at the reviewers, and a high percentage, almost half the reviewers, are the same thing. So it's kind of like, is this right? And then we see organizations like the German Dietetics Association, the Swiss Dietetics Association, groups in Denmark and Belgium and Italy saying, no, it's awful. We can't be doing that. So a little bit disconcerting, that we got all these people that are just lining their babies up and giving them almond milk and this sort of stuff.
I thought that was it. They had determined that it's just not suitable for children and infants.
That is the position of many organizations, but it's not the position of the American Dietetics and Nutrition, which is one of the larger ones. But again, the authors were all three vegans, vegetarians. And so this is what all the sort of the vegan proponents are saying. They're like, well, this is this study here. And every time they show that, I say, oh, that's the one with the three authors that were all ethical vegans. And do they have a potential bias in there? It'd be like me writing an article saying meat is good. I mean, yeah, I agree. And yes, I'm biased toward it, but I would very much acknowledge that, yes, I'm very much biased on this stuff. And it's because of the results I've seen and, that sort of stuff, but it's still very much a bias that should be accounted for. Yeah.
And the danger, I think that you bring up a good point, because of developing brains of infants and newborns, that is really dangerous. And that's not reversible. A lot of chronic disease and even acute disease, a lot of those processes are reversible. That, neurological damage is not one of them.
Yeah, and I've looked into like a lot of these pediatric studies, and there was a study out there looking at I guess it was macrobiotic vegans, and looking at, as you know, for the first 5 years of their life. And even if they leave the diet, even as a teenager, they had delays in, cognitive evaluation. They saw a decrease in cognitive evaluation relative to their peers. So, I mean, you could be doing damage. And what you look at it, you can't tell 5 IQ points on your baby. You're like, well, he's moving, he's rolling and doing these things, but maybe just knock 5 IQ points off your kid's, potential. Or you shorten their height by an inch or two. Is that relative? Is it going to kill them? No. But if your kid had the choice and the kid had anything to say about it, it's like, man, Dad, I really would like having an extra 5 IQ points. It would probably make my life easier. And maybe if I was a little bit taller, it might make my life easier. So, I mean, it's just kind of, it makes me sad when these people are running this experiment on their kids, especially.
I completely agree.
Do they have any, I guess this is probably a very difficult study, I guess, to do, and if you would do it, it would probably just be associational, but like, do they have any good information about like just the formula versus breastfeeding in terms of the quality of, I guess, the outcome?
I don't know. I mean, I think that across the board, most people from their experience would say that breast milk is better. I mean, the physicians in the hospital, I mean, it's highly encouraged. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, Shawn, do you know if they've done studies? I haven't read a ton of studies, like for me personally.
Yeah, there are studies on that, and I haven't got into that much. I mean, just because I look at the ingredients on formula, and it's not a decision that I have to make. But I mean, if you just flip a formula bottle around, it's going to be like corn syrup and soybean oil. That is not good for us. There are other there's a lot of formulations out there, but that's a pretty common one. And so I think the studies show that there's not any significant, outcome differences that are, there's trends and things like that. I don't think they're like, but breast milk clearly is what we're designed for. I mean, it's better for us. There was, some people will say that the formula people did some sort of behind the scenes negative, nasty things, and particularly in third world countries, and try to get in there and try to convince people not to breastfeed and this sort of stuff just to sell their product. But I think, this was something I was going to suggest, and I know a lot of people will cite like Weston A. Price as a good place for formulas. If you're someone that can't breastfeed, they've got some formulas that are apparently a little higher quality, or a lot higher quality, quite honestly.
Goat milk is pretty close.
What's that?
Goat milk?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it might be. I don't, like I said, it's not something I'm intimately interested in right now.
Breastfeeding. I will tell anyone who is breastfeeding, any of your listeners, is that as you get later on in the day, there's an increase in tryptophan in the breast milk, because the increase in tryptophan helps put the baby to sleep. So if you want your baby to sleep during the day, pump later on at night, and you'll have a breast milk with a composition that is higher in tryptophan, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting. They used to supplement tryptophan. They used to sell it as a sleep aid, and then there was some like contaminated stuff from China, and it caused some people to get really sick. So that came off the market. One of the thoughts was turkey is high in tryptophan, so everybody would get postprandial sleepiness from the tryptophan in turkey. So it's kind of interesting, but that is it's kind of an interesting factoid about the breast milk.
I think the turkey stuff was by Fernstrom, the large neutral amino acids. I don't think, it's interesting, the individual amino acids, because I've been reading about it, there isn't a ton of stuff on them. It's like the amino acid science, it's still, even if it's been 45 years, it's still newer science, which is wild.
Yeah, I guess because most of us eat protein, we don't eat amino acids. I mean, amino acids are supplements. It's hard to get just isolated leucine outside of a pill. And so you're eating, like steak behind me is going to have the full complement of amino acids plus.
That's making me starving.
Yeah, you got to eat. Yeah, I'm considering eating another couple of steaks. I don't know, goodness. But so what are you finding? So you said what is your diet currently right now as you're breastfeeding? Because a lot of people ask me about, is it safe to breastfeed eating meat? And I tell them, yeah. So
and this is just me. The majority of my diet is red meat. And it's just been that way for years. It's what works best for me. My husband calls it prison food. He says that because we actually eat on-the-ground bison. That's really my staple. It's high in zinc, it's high in B12, it's high in iron. It's just the OG of superfoods. I'll add in a little oat milk in my coffee, and I use collagen, and that seems to help with my milk production. That's pretty much what I'm eating these days. I'm very simple. I am super low maintenance, and all of my friends that come over, they just think if I'm cooking, man, they're in trouble.
Yeah, we had a dinner, Thanksgiving dinner. We had some folks came over, and they eat stuff. So we got a bunch of just other food, but I was out cooking. I was cooking steaks, and I mostly ate steaks. But it was just kind of, I rarely do that anymore. I don't really have to think about food anymore. It's literally as hard as, do I want one or two steaks, and that's that for me is kind of nice because I'm busy. I got enough time. I'm too busy with other stuff to spend 3 hours a day preparing meals and cleaning up after meals and thinking about meals and that sort of stuff. Zach, are you? I can't remember where you're at, because you haven't run in a while. I mean, you've been off for a couple of weeks, right? So you're in recovery mode, or where are you at right now?
Yeah, kind of a bit of recovery. I did a 50-miler about a week and a half ago, so I bounced back physically from it, but it's like, it's just, there's no reason to really jump into a big training block after that. So I'm eating pretty low carb, a lot of animal products right now. I've been doing a lot of, I'll get like a ground beef, and I'll make that, and then I'll just melt a bunch of like cheese in it, and that's pretty good. That's just kind of like a good like go-to to have around for me.
I don't know, Gabrielle, Zach was on Rogan's show like a day or two ago. I just watched it last night. So he announced that he was saying, Joe, I'm thinking about running across the country and trying to break the record for running 3,100 miles in 40 days or something like that. And so, and Rogan's like, yeah, we're going to sponsor you, Zach. We're totally behind you. So Zach kind of roped himself into it. So he doesn't have a choice now. So he has to do it.
Oh my God. What are you going to, I want to know, what is it? What do you eat? Eating that?
What's that? Well, what do you eat?
What are you eating?
The guy who has the record, I think he was eating like something like 15,000 calories a day or something like that. And I mean, I think he was eating just basically everything he could get his hands on. I think like, because when I'm training for most of the races that I peak for, I'll bring back some carbohydrate when I get into peak training. But with something that's as low intensity as this is going to have to be, I think this is like the perfect window for something that would be a little closer to like strict keto or zero carb, because you just wouldn't really want or need to have a real fast acting fuel source for something when you're going to be out there, 10, 12, maybe 14 hours a day on average. So that's where I'm at right now. But it is funny because I talked to the guy that I was planning this with the day before going on Rogan. So it was like we barely even scratched the surface as to like the logistics of it all. And I had no clue that Joe was going to be that excited about it. I figured he'd be excited about it, but I didn't think he was going to want to sponsor it and promote it and everything. So we might be working with a little shorter timeline than originally planned, but I'll have to do my homework.
To plan for something like that in terms of training.
Oh, for training? Yeah. So, I mean, it's so foreign to anything I've ever done before but just my general like principle and philosophy with training is you just get as specific as you can to the event you're doing as you get closer to it. So for something like this, where it's going to be really slow, really long, I would just probably the balance would be, I'm going to want to do a training block that gets me ready to be on my feet all day. But that training block I have to also recover from it and be able to actually go and actually do the event too. So I think there's a pretty fine line there. I mean, the guy who broke the record previously, he was doing like 200 to 250 mile training weeks leading into it. So I don't know if I'll do that much. I actually think there's a different way to maybe go about it. I think he was doing just really slow running, pretty consistent. Whereas I think there's maybe a way to do like a speed walking mechanic and then also a running mechanic and alternate between the two, in which case then I'd have to really work on the speed walking mechanics. I've never really done that before. So, it would maybe make it a little more simplified in terms of the way that my body gets stressed over the course of it if I'm not doing the same mechanic over and over the entire time. but I've got a lot of homework to do is what I learned the last couple of days.
Hey, Gabrielle, let me ask you on because you on your pregnancy, you were still working out during your pregnancy, weren't you? As I recall. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So you feel like you're bouncing back pretty quickly, or are you at where you want to be?
so my normal body fat percentage was about 14.
Okay,
And
that's pretty low.
right,
Yeah.
I mean, so that's kind of where I normally am. And while you're breastfeeding, so now I'm breastfeeding, I'm at 24%. That's really high for me. But I am back training.
What type of workouts were you doing when you were pregnant? Was there like
A lot of kettlebells.
Oh, okay.
So just a lot of kettlebell work, a lot of squatting, a lot of functional movements. And I was sick the whole time, so I would do a set, then go throw up, and then do another set. I mean, when you're married to a SEAL, there's no excuse.
There's no taking a break.
No excuse.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when I was in the military. It's kind of funny. I went through officer training school, kind of wimpy thing, right? So, but I got back from playing professional rugby in New Zealand. I was like Superman in shape, and I go to this thing, and it's Air Force officers, and it was like the Bad News Bears. These guys weren't athletes; they were like clowns. And I was just like hard charging. I mean, I was running a 400 meter in like 55, 56 seconds at 240 pounds, which is not bad back then, Zach. But I would run, and I would get done with my PT sessions. We do all these practice PT sessions, and I'd almost just about puke after every one of them. I just pushed myself till I couldn't do it. And it's kind of crazy to think about that, but that was what I was in. I remember there's a guy that he reminded me kind of like the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz, or the Scarecrow. He was just kind of really uncoordinated and flopping around. And I was on the we had to write a newsletter. It was just this silly officer training stuff. They made you do these stupid tasks, and we were in there, and there was one of those big paper cutters, and he managed to cut his own head in that thing. I don't know how he did it. It was like these were guys that were like, you guys are not at all athletes, but it was just comical the way they did that. But I remember that throwing up's not fun. I can't imagine that you do that. And I've done that a few times working out, but I tend not to. I've done where I've pushed myself so hard, like on like the Airdyne bike, where I'd go as all out like a minute on that thing, and I would literally question my sanity and my existence. I'd stand outside. I would go outside. I would do it in my house or where I had the thing set up, and I would have to walk outside because I believe that there was more oxygen out there, because like there's clearly not enough oxygen in the room. I got to go outside and get some more. I'd rather be laying against my truck going, my God, what am I doing? It's craziness. But that is what we kind of crazy people do. I'm sure Shane does the same sort of stuff. And so lifting weights, doing kettlebells during pregnancy is fine. That's what most OB-GYNs will tell you, I think, unless you got some kind of placenta previa or some weirdness going on with that.
It's interesting. There's not much data on pregnant women in training, and they really don't have. Because a lot of them are saying, be careful, and the data actually doesn't support that. There isn't much information there about women and training, pregnancy in particular, and training. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, if you just look at, I would imagine, nomadic women did not have the chance to just kind of lounge around, when they're moving from, place to place, and the same thing with other animals. Not that, we're not the same as other animals, but you don't see, most animals in the wild are, they're pregnant and they keep doing what they're normally doing.
And you want to protect your muscle mass, because that's going to be your biggest protector against gestational diabetes. Obviously a diet, but your largest site for glucose disposal is your muscle.
Yeah, muscle is important. We've talked about that many, many times. It's always good to reemphasize that. What do you got coming up in the near sort of term? Obviously baby is going to be very important there, but any big projects coming up? Any new, are you going to be going on any more shows or anything like that?
Yes. So I am working on a book.
Awesome.
Finally, really kind of getting myself together for that, working on a book. We're actually speaking at definitely at least two of the same conferences this year. So we'll both be at PaleoFX and KetoCon. I'm speaking here at Stronger New York, and a couple other ones. NTA. I don't know when this podcast comes out, put another one in, I think it's Seattle, Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And then just, I'm really working on some of my online programming because a lot of people are asking for the people that can't come see me in person want me to still be able to educate them. And so I'm working on an online course about muscle-centric medicine. And hopefully that will be up and done.
Yeah, I still love that. I love that term, muscle-centric medicine. I think it's great, and I think it's important. And it just kind of, I get frustrated when people say that, just because you have muscle doesn't mean you're healthy. I mean, and the implication is, people that are just have no muscle are just as healthy as people that have muscle. And I would say that's probably not true. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's people that are, I think this is something that when we talk about Keith Barr, and I think strength and muscle go together, but strength is probably the more appropriate. It's not that you have to be a hulking bodybuilder to have good benefits, but you need to have good strength levels, and you need to have decent amounts of lean mass, and I think that is the sort of the messages we should get out there, and particularly for women, because women, I don't know if it's still, I mean, stronger women are becoming more and more accepted, at least in some parts of the community, but we're still seeing this anorexic, runway model, eat salads and eat 700 calories a day type of thing that's being promoted to some degree. And that's just, that doesn't set you up for a healthy aging after age. I saw Christy Brinkley, model. I remember girls, when I was a boy, I thought she was super hot. I was like, wow, Christy Brinkley, and seen her on Sports Illustrated, but she's in there vegan, vegetarian for, decades. And now and she's not that old. She's like early 60s, and she falls. And I mean, her arm is shattered into really bad osteopenic fracture. And this is something that could have been avoided with more protein in the diet. And I would argue more animal protein in the diet.
Yeah. I mean, we do know that those with higher animal protein and high quality protein have higher bone density, right? So that's totally true.
Absolutely. And then I think one of the things that I saw with calcium, there's some concern with higher protein diets leading to hypercalciuria. So we excrete more calcium. The thought was we were getting it from our bones, but turns out that we actually absorb more calcium on a higher protein diet. So it just kind of cancels out. And so because I get these like fruitarian people saying, oh, meat is acidic and it's going to leach all the calcium from your bones. And that's just complete garbage and complete nonsense. And our bones are 40 to 50% protein anyway. And it's just, the silliness, the myths you have to dispel, and the people that are brainwashed by it. And it definitely is an uphill struggle.
That is for sure.
Zach, anything else?
No, I think we covered some good stuff.
Well, I hope, because I had plumbers in the background working, and they're telling me I've got problems, so it's not good.
Uh-oh. So you're going to have to put those stakes on the back burner for tomorrow. Get some work to do.
Well, no, I mean, they're done, but they're going to come. I got to come back tomorrow with my supervisor, which is never a good.
Oh no, yeah,
never a good thing. We've got this weird sort of drainage system outdoor that's up to some grinder that's apparently was tripped or something like that, and yada yada yada. So, anyway, sounds like fun. Sounds like it's going to be a big bill.
That's exactly what that sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway. Well, Gabrielle, it's a pleasure. Good luck to you, and congratulations on the baby, and say congrats to Shane for getting into medical school. And, I think looking forward to what you do in the future, and I'm sure we'll be able to collaborate. Like I said, let me ask you, can I send people that are on meat-based diets to you if as a resource at some point if they need a doc? Okay.
That this is true.
All right. So we'll include you in our list of physicians that don't mind seeing people that eat meat.
New York, yeah, of course. New York and New Jersey. I have license in both places.
Okay, awesome. Cool. All right.
And if you want to share your social media and website and stuff, feel free to do so too, and we'll link those to the show notes. Okay,
you want me to share it now or send it to you?
You can share it now.
Okay, so Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and that's on Instagram, and I'm probably most active there. And my website, which needs a full makeover, and that should be happening within the next 6 months, is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and Twitter and Facebook with the same handle.
Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch for coming on.
Yeah, I'm glad this worked out. Really nice to see both of you.
Great. Thank you.
Hey folks, Human Performance Outliers Podcast is growing, and due to the growth, we are looking to take on some new sponsors. So if you feel like your company or organization would be a good fit for our audience, please do not hesitate to reach out to hpopodcast@gmail.com. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Human Performance Outliers Podcast with hosts Dr. Shawn Baker and Zach Bitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider following us on social media and checking out our websites. Links to those can be found in the show notes. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to shoot us an email at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for tuning into the show.